Hello, my name is George Freestone. I'm a member of Advent Lutheran Church in Berks County within the Northeast Pennsylvania Synod, and I'm also a facilitator of our men's group at Advent. And I want to, in story form, talk a little bit about some of the activities of our men's group. And the reason I'd like to do that is to try and encourage other groups within the Synod to do the same. The hope being that by sharing what various men's groups are doing, we can learn from one another and better support and sustain men's ministry throughout the Synod. One other word before I go too far. I have a shirt on that was actually a gift from Lutheran Men in Mission. I have a role with them. It's a national organization. It's an organization that helps to support and sustain men's groups throughout the ELCA. I am an ambassador with the Lutheran Men in Mission for our synod, and in response, they gave me this particular shirt, which I'll proudly wear during this discussion. I will share with you where we've gotten some support from Lutheran Men in Mission and maybe where your group can too. So, what am I going to talk about today? I'm going to talk about four things that our group does. The first item is our monthly gatherings over breakfast. That's what we've been doing for the longest period of time, and that takes the form of either Bible study, book study, largely education over breakfast, with plenty of time for camaraderie as well. The second thing that we do is in response to a request. Every quarter, we now offer a program on a specific topic. It's called Breakfast Before Worship. It includes the women, young people within the congregation as well who have an interest, and it's on a topic of interest. And for these first two activities, as I describe them later on in this story series, I have video clips to try and describe them. The third thing we do is try and focus on giving back, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the service projects that we undertake, either that we come up with or that maybe the church or other congregations are actually working on that we can support. The final thing that I'll talk about is field trips. To learn more about our faith, we have found it very interesting to go to local or reasonably far away sites that we can learn from. So that's what you're going to hear in the rest of the story. So let's talk a little bit about our monthly meetings. One of the things that we discovered early on is these meetings go a whole lot better with food. And I know that having visited several men's groups throughout our synod, some men's groups meet in a bar because they feel that things get better with beer. So either food, beer, or whatever, but it's good to have an incentive to have people want to come to these meetings. And part of the incentive, of course, is learning and sharing more about the faith. Part of the incentive, I think, is also spending time with your friends. And that's why second part of that first bullet underneath the monthly gathering or whatever emphasizes the fact that it's always important to provide some informal time just for folks to catch up. Okay, so what do we do in these monthly sessions? Well, one of the things that we did for almost 2 to 3 years is we read a series of different books about faiths around the world. We started out by taking a look at world religions, and we dug into a small book, easy to read book about different world religions: the Hindu faith, the Buddhist faith, the Christian faith, the Jewish faith, the Islamic faith. All of those things were very, very interesting. And so after Sometime in that particular book, learning about each of the different world religions, we then peeled the onion back a little bit more, and we got a resource from Augsburg Press about various Christian faiths, the different denominations that exist. And so we went through, I don't know, almost 30 different Christian denominations. And we had a lot of fun with this. We put together a spreadsheet. Well, I put together a spreadsheet. People say I haven't met a problem that a spreadsheet can't solve, but the spreadsheet was very helpful in comparing these various religions on similar criteria. And so there is quite a massive spreadsheet that exists as a result of our looking through each of these different Christian faiths. We put together a quiz too. We offered the quiz to everybody in the congregation. We posted the spreadsheet, had a lot of fun with that, and we awarded a prize for the person who had the best score on the quiz. That was an Amazon gift card, I think. So that's an example of what we've done. We frequently take a look at books that are aligned with the Christian faith, and we also take a look at books of the Bible. And we've been tending to alternate between the New Testament and the Old Testament. Right now, we're in the midst of the book of Acts. And here's a plug for Lutheran Men in Mission. When we considered the various Bibles that are out there that we might use for our Bible study, we selected the Master Builder's Bible. We did that because of the supporting material that comes with the Master Builder's Bible in the Bible itself, helping to structure meetings. So we have tended to use that Bible as we've been going through the various books of the Bible. So that is a short course through what we tend to do in monthly meetings. And I'll close this segment just before getting us into a clip of one of our meetings on Acts by saying, if you think about that past program example that I talked about, the various faiths, some of the field trips that we actually took as a result of the looking at the various denominations, Christian denominations, as well as the various world religions, is we took a trip to a local Jewish synagogue and we attended both their service as well as their gathering afterward. They had a meal, and let me tell you, it was quite a meal and something that was difficult for us to reciprocate in kind at Advent when we hosted our Jewish friends as well. We also, and ironically, on the day of the New Zealand shootings at a mosque in New Zealand, we attended the local Reading Islamic Center for a service, both men and women. So, two examples of field trips that really came out of some of our past programs. Now, let me just set the table for the clip that I'm going to show. I'm going to flip to a small group of our men's group from Advent, and we are discussing an introduction to Acts. And our interim pastor, Pastor Tom Irwin, is leading the discussion. And without further ado, I'm going to flip over to YouTube and play that video. But because the sound may not be as loud as you would like, I've also turned on closed captioning so that you might be able to follow along with some of the discussion. This is just meant to be an example. It may not be the most riveting clip that you've ever watched, but I think it's a good example of typically what we do month in, month out.
So what do you know about the Book of Acts? What if we didn't have the books open in front of it? What could you tell me about the Book of Acts? Not much for me. Not much.
I don't know. It describes Pentecost.
Okay.
What, we'll get the Bible, first.
Or describe Pentecost. Describe Pentecost for me first.
It's where,
I shouldn't put George on the spot.
let me try.
You go ahead.
Even if it's not right, you can help guide me. I believe it's where perhaps the Holy Spirit may have descended upon those present, and they all spoke in different languages, yet people were understanding what was being said. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah, and you've got principal pieces of that experience. Can anybody tell me what Pentecost is? What is Pentecost? It's a harvest festival where they bring the harvest into the fields, and then they would haggle over the cost of grain and so on, and they would get their supplies out of that. And so there were people gathering in Jerusalem from all over the world, the known world at that time, get a deal on the harvest. And so that's why they were Parthians, Medes, Elamites, residents of Mesopotamia, and that whole list of nobody ever wants to get the readings for Pentecost.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the second activity that the Advent Men's Group plays an active part in sponsoring. That is something that is known as BBW, and that stands for Breakfast Before Worship. The reason why we have this quarterly program prior to worship is just an attempt to maximize the audience. Our thought was many people will be coming to church anyway, so it might not be a significant inconvenience for them to come to the church a little bit early to enjoy a meaningful program. So that's why we hold this on Sunday morning before our worship, which is set for 10 o'clock on Sunday mornings. So how did this come about? Well, I went to council asking them for something, and I forget what the something was, but during that meeting, after I made my pitch and council reacted to the opportunity, one of the people on council said, "Hey, we've got a question for you." So I am one of the 4 facilitators that we have for the men's group, and I was there representing all 4 of us. And this woman said, George, first of all, your monthly meetings are set at a very inconvenient time for those who work. And secondly, you limit the scope of those people who can come to men. How about thinking about something where you could open up attendance to all? And the reason she said that, it was really a compliment. She said, we enjoy the interest generated by your topics. And so maybe what you can do is get a broader audience. Well, the men's group talked about it and they said, well, we also enjoy getting together as a men's group, but maybe we can have the best of both worlds. So what we came up with is this breakfast before worship where we meet quarterly. And let me just share a little bit of the most recent example that we had. We were very fortunate to host Bruce Becker, who actually lives very close to Advent Lutheran Church, but he played a significant role in the aftermath to the horrific and tragedies surrounding the school shootings in October of 2006 for several Amish girls. Just a horrific event. Bruce happened to be painting an image of a school bell, at the time. And when he heard about the news of the shooting, he thought, maybe there's something I can do. And one thing led to another, but his painting became kind of a lightning rod for focusing a message all about kindness and compassion. The behavior he was amplifying and reflecting was really the behavior of the Amish community, who, in their grief, in the loss of children for no good reason, the Amish displayed forgiveness for the shooter who took his own life as a result of the incident, the shooter's family, and all were amazed at how the Amish community could be so forgiving. And so Bruce reflected that particular feeling, focused it on kindness and compassion. He finished his painting. He wrote a book about this whole situation and the aftermath to the event. And we were very fortunate this past Sunday to have Bruce to our church to talk about this follow-up to the incident. Now, Bruce talked to us for about 45 minutes. I'm going to show you a brief clip where he responds to forgiveness as a part of this message and why he focuses on kindness and compassion, but also he has very relevant thoughts about forgiveness.
Couple of words, more words about particularly the forgiveness that the Amish community had for the shooter,
Yeah,
the shooter's family,
Sure.
etc.
yeah, I'd be glad to, yeah. The forgiveness, that's an interesting, I'm glad you asked that actually, because I'll get to it in a second. I want to lead into it by saying this. You'll notice this is only titled kindness and compassion, not forgiveness or kindness, compassion, and forgiveness. Tell you why. Interacting with the Amish and interacting with the English, I have really come to realize that the idea of forgiveness in the English community is looked at as a weakness. It's terrible. It's terrible. But that's the case. And I thought, you know what? That one word, I'm just not going to put it on here so that this image and this message does connect with people. If it had forgiveness, it may not have connected the same. Gives me the chance to talk about it, but it might not have been the same. So that's why I left that one word from the title. Now, some of the things that the Amish had to say about forgiveness. Well, I distinctly remember meeting with the father of one of the girls that was there that day, talking about forgiveness. And I said, you know, the English community want to know, how can you just forgive like that? Just like do it. It's not easy. And he said to me, no, it's not easy at all. He said, I'm a human being and I can say that I forgive this man for what he's done, but then I wake up the next day and that anger just builds up again. And I have to realize that I need to learn to forgive him again. And there's a Bible passage that states that when someone asked Jesus about forgiveness, and you know, they asked him, how many times do I have to forgive a man if he, I think it was hit me or something. And he said 70 times 7, you know, like as many as it takes. And the forgiveness doesn't happen just that one time, but maybe you have to bring it up and find it again each time. But it's something that they felt was very important to do and worked on it right away.
Let's move on now and talk a little bit about the third component of what the men's group does at Advent Lutheran Church, and that is to sponsor service projects. I don't have any videos from what we have been involved with, and I really missed an opportunity to catch an interesting video for one of them that I'll explain later. But I do have several pictures, and The service projects that our men's group gets involved with fall into two categories. And they're kind of exemplified by the first two rows of pictures here. In the middle row, what the men's group does is help service projects that are already underway by other groups or segments of the Advent congregation. The second category is where we come up with a service project ourselves, and that's exemplified by the first row. Let me talk about the middle row first. The first two photos in that row from the left of the screen are all about delivering Bombas socks to various organizations in the Reading area. And there you can see me proudly wearing my Doors t-shirt, dropping off Bombas socks at Safe Berks. The middle picture is some of the men getting those boxes ready. The rightmost picture in that middle row is where Advent played a role in stocking food for Trinity Lutheran in Reading, where they were sponsoring meals for Common Ground. So these three pictures really help show how our men's group tries to support other activities at Advent. In the top photo, this is really an outgrowth of the second component that I was talking to you about just recently, that being the breakfast before worship. We hosted Julia Kratzer-Frank to talk a little bit about Lutheran disaster response. And in that case, what we decided we would do is try and come up with some disaster kits, hygiene kits for people who are displaced because of some kind of a storm or what have you, and really have no access to some of the toiletries that they might have had at home. So we got a group together to try and assemble disaster kits. We had originally shot for 40. We ended up with more than 100. But the video that would have been interesting is showing everybody scurrying around and filling up those kits. And you can see a still photo of that at the very top row here. The bottom row is just a couple of examples of additional service projects. We helped move the free little library and pantry that we have at Advent outside the church for folks to either borrow books or just take food, as some folks are in need in the community. And so we had these on one side of the church. We just simply wanted to move it to the other side of the church. It was fun. So a group of the men from the men's group decided to help out. And the last photo, which is in the bottom row, a little bit to the center, is an example where we have partnered with other men's groups and congregations. In that example, we're actually at the Synod office right north of the airport there in Bethlehem. And this is principally the Beer, Brats, and Bible Club from St. Mark's, also in Berks County. But I tagged along, becoming involved a little bit with them as we were learning more about other men's groups in the area. And what we were doing is helping out with some of the gardening and pruning around the Synod office a few years back. So a very good chance to get to know another men's group in the area. Okay, we'll wrap it up with a brief discussion of the fourth area that the men's group at Advent Lutheran West Lawn gets involved with, that being field trips. We tend to try and schedule field trips during nice weather, so it typically happens during the spring or the fall. And it's a way to engage not only all members of our congregation, but also friends of our congregation too. That will become evident as I talk through a few examples that we have in pictures here. First, I want to talk about the several pictures that are at the bottom of this screen, starting with the middle row. Following the monthly discussion by the men's group of different world religions, we took field trips where we experienced both a Islamic service, a prayer service on Fridays, and a Sabbath service, Shabbat, at the neighboring synagogue, Kesher Zion, here in Wyomissing. So those are the first two pictures that you see in the middle row. Another field trip that a few of us took is we went to the Atonement Lutheran Church service on Wednesday where the Common Ground folks come and have a meal as well as worship. And I guess one of the reasons why I wanted to include that is many of our service projects or our activities are sponsored by Thrive in Action teams. And when we get t-shirts, we always donate the extras to Common Ground. In terms of the bottom row, we take field trips, just as I mentioned, to Atonement, just around the corner from Advent, but also to local churches of note. And in the bottom row on the left, you can see Reverend Fred Opalinsky and one of our members having just climbed the better part of the steeple for Trinity Lutheran in Reading, downtown. We also, over time, have visited both campuses of the Lutheran Seminary, the ULS, and in the middle there, you can see Valentine Hall at the Gettysburg campus. And on the right-hand side of the bottom row, you can see the famed library at the Philadelphia campus with the glass floors built to allow light to come in before electricity. So those are some brief comments on field trips. Two of the featured field trips I wanted to mention are up on the top. And on the left, the first one that you see there, we took a field trip to Washington, D.C. and experienced the very interesting, very lovely Museum of the Bible. And you can see we had quite a crowd for that. We had invited, again, members of our congregation, but also friends of our congregation and friends, neighboring congregations as well to come along with us. So quite a crowd. We got a big bus. We drove down to Washington, enjoyed the better part of the day and lunch at the museum. And then we drove home in the bus, enjoying movies both directions, going down and coming back. And we also had an evening meal on our way home from Washington, D.C. The last picture that I'll talk about here is a trip that we took to Trapp, Pennsylvania. And Trapp is a beautiful historic site. We toured the Henry Muhlenberg house, the DeWeese Tavern, the cemetery behind Augustus Church. And here you can see the group of people that we had in front of Old Augustus Church as we were enjoying that tour, both inside and outside the church. We checked out the cemetery in the back as well. Folks enjoyed that trip so much that in May of 2025, we're going to return. So that's just a brief summary of some of the field trips that our men's group tries to put in front of our congregation to try and make more real the faith that we all believe in. So what have we heard in terms of feedback? Well, for the men's only gatherings over breakfast, What we've heard most prevalently is that they're learning about our faith, contrast to other faiths, as well as books of the Bible. A symptom of how it's being received is when folks need to be out of the area for part of the year, they ask to Zoom in and still join. With regard to our quarterly breakfast before worship sessions, we are now starting to see other congregations attend. Some of that, I think, has to do with the 6261 work that's going on at Advent, but still, we're seeing very good feedback to those quarterly programs. Service projects, what I hear is, we're really making a difference. And with regard to field trips, they're just fun. All of these things, I think, are helping Advent members further network with one another and build stronger linkages between them. In conclusion, the reason why we put together this video, this story, was so that we could share what we do, just thinking a little bit that that might help other men's groups with what they might be able to do as well. Secondly, we'd like to hear back from other men's groups, so we'd encourage other men's groups to share their story. And finally, we wanted to share Lutheran Men in Mission resources, things that can help support and sustain interesting topics for your men's group. Thank you for your attention.